Hello, class. Today we are going to talk about transcription and information exchange. So we have some essential questions. What is transcription? What is the connection between transcription, text, and cultural knowledge? And what happens when information is exchanged? Right now, this is incredibly important because transcription is being able to know the difference between what is really said and what you think somebody's saying, and to get it right. So what is transcription? It's the process of writing something or rewriting something. It's not the same as creating original text, like sitting down and writing an essay for English or me, or doing some creative writing or journaling. No, you're not working with anything original. But at the same time, it's not exactly copying things word for word, though sometimes it can be close to that. For example, over here, we have on the left a letter from 1866. It is handwritten, a document that is a little tricky to read if you don't know how to read cursive, and this is an antique cursive. So if you're not familiar with that, you have to work at it. And if you're trying to research something, trying to get through those original documents, the primary source documents, can be a little bit difficult. So over on the right is the transcription of it, where what you see there is transcribed over here into modern English. So transcription as writing, it includes writing down the spoken word. And that's how we learn things and knew things. Before there was mass printing, knowledge was passed from person to person by talking and memorizing and then retelling. And when people listen and then write down what somebody is saying, you have transcribed that information. In the image, you're looking at a StoryCorps site. That is, you can find more information about it online. It's a national project that isn't working quite the same way with COVID. They're doing it online now. Before, they would bring these temporary buildings to different communities, and if it was a rural community, it would be a bus. And basically, you go in there and you tell your story. And you talk about, it could just be a little family story. It could be your perspective on historical events. It could be almost anything. And then that is collected and translated into the written word, and both the recording and the transcription of that recording are stored for later. This is not a new idea. There have been, ever since the Great Depression, part of the Government Works Project was going around and collecting these kind of histories, personal histories. There are jobs that rely on transcriptionists. So oral historians interview people, and they're usually elderly people, and write down what they said. So this is not so much like a journalist that's working with contemporary news as it is, for example, going and interviewing somebody now about World War II, one of the last surviving vets that are all over 100. And then being able to hear what they say and write it down so people could share it. Court reporters, like you see there, write down what is done and said in court. There are laws about filming in the courtroom, and court reporters predate the technologies that we have. It used to be literally somebody sitting there with a pencil and a pen and a piece of paper and writing down very rapidly in shorthand everything that was said and done. So now they have computers and the stenography machines. Stenographers write down speech. So they would be, if somebody is giving a speech or having an event, something like that, the stenographer would be writing down whatever it is they said. This was often used in business when somebody wanted to dictate a letter. The stenographer, the person that was writing the letter would say, "Dear so-and-so, blah, 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 blah," and the stenographer would write that down. A lot of this is being replaced now because we have the voice to text and vice versa technology. But as you know, that technology isn't perfect yet, and there's a lot of mistakes. So there's still a place for stenographers. You have to be able to listen very closely, process language very rapidly, and type super fast. The folklorists write down stories. So a folklorist, and the Brothers Grimm are probably the ones that you know the most, you know, fairy tales and whatnot. They went around and collected stories and wrote them down and collected them. So it's, instead of collecting things that actually happened, whether it's a life experience, historical event, this is collecting down stories that are fictional that are passed from generation to generation. And folklorists are still a very important part because a lot of our storytelling is still vocal. When I tell stories in class, it's not the same as if I were to formally write that down. Okay? And then transcription is also rewriting. It's rewriting existent works. And so there are a couple reasons for doing this. You can make the damaged copies easier to read. You can modernize language like Old English to American English. You can correct errors or have a minor addition of information. That is usually done because there was an error in printing and not a creative error. So you're not changing the meaning by rewriting. You are just making sure that whatever was messed up, whatever typos are there, are fixed. Now, with the modernization of language, if you look over to the right, you have the same idea written in 3 different forms of English. The top one is the Old English, and you can see that there are some differences. Instead of then, there's dan, which phonetically dan, then, similar. She went. This is Old English, spelled with an A. Tongue, spelled with a U. Okay? And this speak, that's Latin, that's part of it, and it's written the way Latin is written. The words are not in the same order that we would write it in. Then in Middle English, it's probably a lot easier for you to speak or to read, because there you have the than, she, gan, to spaken, to speak. This Middle English, there's your E for English, but look at all those S's, and there's a Y. What's that Y doing there? And tongue has become the modern spelling. And then you have the early modern English tongue. You have this E added on to went. If you have noticed when you are out and about, sometimes if you go to a shop, it'll be spelled in early modern English, and instead of S-H-O-P, it'll be S-H-O-P-P-E. And then spake instead of speak. Early modern English still has that weird Y. And then you have our late modern English tongue. And when you're transcribing, like if they made you read Shakespeare in Miss Elsie's class, the way it was written, it would be extremely difficult for you to read and understand. So the transcriptionist kind of puts it in wording that we know how to read. So, bonus. Transcription in science is when DNA is copied onto RNA and vice versa. So you're using part of the RNA strand, which is the mRNA, and you can add it to existing systems to make them work differently. And this is important right now because this is how the COVID vaccine works in really simple terms. So the COVID mRNA part is the vaccine. It's not COVID. It's not a live virus. It's not the full DNA. It's just part of it. And I'm having you think of it this way. If my name was DNA, that's that string of letters, REBEKAH, Rebecca, then mRNA would be part of that name. And I just took out the consonants, RBKH. All right? It doesn't say Rebecca. But when that mRNA is put into us with the vaccine, that's enough information to give our body to start producing the antibodies against COVID. Those are the things that fight the disease that your body makes naturally when you're sick. And that means if you are infected, you won't get as sick, but you also have a good chance of not getting infected at all. And this is a new, safer way to create vaccines altogether. So for the mRNA vaccine, you have to have 2 doses. And the reason why is that the mRNA, to make the right kind of antibodies, is too big just to do it in 1 dose. So they split it up. That way the body has a greater success of filling in the blanks. Science. It's our friend. So there are connections between text, transcription, and cultural knowledge that are important. So whenever you have information that is transcribed into text or written down, there's a lot of room for humans to make mistakes. Because you have the process, you have whatever is providing the information, then you have the person that is writing down the information, but chances are they may not be copying it exactly. And because their job is to make sure that the information is understood. And then you have the person that is receiving the information. So it's a lot like misheard lyrics when it goes bad, as you see in the meme. And if you Google the misheard lyrics, there's all sorts of really super funny ones that totally change the meaning. Don't you want to be more than friends? To don't you want to be old and frail? So there's more connections between text transcription and cultural knowledge. It's important to remember that people make changes and mistakes, especially if you're recording something from a culture that you're not familiar with. You're writing down what you hear and what you see, but that's like the outside shell. It doesn't have the meaning. So a couple things can go wrong. One of the most common ones is when you are writing something down and you write a word incorrectly, and it could just be the lack of a letter. For example, if I wrote, I'm supposed to write she down, but instead I write down he because I make a mistake and leave that S off, and I keep doing that. All of a sudden the whole meaning of the whatever it is I'm writing down changes because the gender perspective has changed. It's gone from male to female. And then descriptions of things may not be interpreted correctly. For example, over here, you see early drawing from an illuminated book, so probably around 800 AD, of our friend the elephant. And by looking at it, we can kind of tell it's an elephant, but there's a lot of things wrong with it. And this was drawn because somebody had traveled and saw an elephant, came back, told somebody what they saw, that person wrote it down, and then when they were making the book, the illustrator read that description, and this is what they drew based on that description. So it's tall. It's really tall, taller than those trees. Its feet are kind of looking a little bit like horseshoes or slippers. Its legs are straight, long, and kind of modeled after a horse, and its tail is like a horse's. But that's not how elephants' legs are made. It's totally missing the ears. The tusks are upside down, and its trunk looks a little bit like a vacuum cleaner, and the mouth is on the side of the trunk instead of it opening. And it looks really angry. That is such an angry elephant. Oh my goodness. So angry. So what happens when the information is exchanged? You have those three things: the source, the person transcribing, and the person reading the transcription. And the meme, the South Park meme, it's talking about the telephone game, where you've seen this happen with gossip, both online and off, where you say something to a friend, that friend changes its meaning a little bit differently and repeats it until you have your rad lime at the end of your discussion. In other words, the last person to get the information has it totally wrong. And then you also have, if the person doesn't know the context, the background of the information, or the meaning of the information, you can only guess at what it means. For example, this phrase: do you remember the 5th of November? What does that mean to you when I say it? Is it just a random date? Do I want you to look on your calendar, see what you did that day? Is it a birthday? Did something happen that day? What's going on? If you don't have that context for it, for that sentence, it's meaningless to you. Or you put on your own personal meaning. People who know the context for that sentence know exactly what that means. So this is really complicated ideas. And it's not something that you may understand right now or get right away, but it's still super important as far as in this class. The reason why it's important is because we are looking at other people's stuff. We're looking at other cultures' crafts. We're not part of those cultures. And while we can study and try to understand the context and content of the crafts, what they mean, why they're being made, we can't really understand it because we're not a real part of it. So it's important to remember that what we're learning has been transcribed by others. We're looking at it through the lens of being students in North Carolina. And then when we create it, that changes it again. And it will have a different meaning to another person. So, one of the things that we're going to do today for your assignment is you're going to have to use active listening for it. What active listening is really listening, not just hearing things. Normally, and this is not because you're bad or lazy or anything else, it's just the way humans work. and you probably have done it during this presentation, you are hearing me speak, but it goes literally in one ear, out the other. You're not listening. You're not processing the words and putting meaning to them, transcribing them into information. So you have to actively listen. And that means you need to concentrate. You need to focus and block out other distractions. Closing your eyes might help. Somebody in one of the other classes noticed this now. You guys know I don't hear well. With masks on, I can't read lips. So a lot of times I'll get close to you, ask you to speak up, and then I'll close my eyes so I can really listen. And it's not that I hear better with my eyes closed. It's that I concentrate better. It's easier to process. And it's not just the words, it's the way the words are said. So for your assignment, you have a transcription exercise. You need your Chromebook. You need traditional or digital drawing materials or writing materials. And if you're in class, you probably need headphones. So in another recording that's linked on Classroom, I'm going to tell you a story. Listen to the recording carefully as many times as you want to. And then I want you to tell me the story back. In other words, you're going to transcribe that story. Either A, write it down in words as close to what I say as possible, or B, draw what I said like an illustration with all the details. And then you're going to turn in a document or an image. Okay? Okay. Questions? Ask.